Welcome to another Liquid Bullet Productionz. Today we're going to be taking a look at the London Underground serial killer Kieran Kelly, who wandered up and down the northern lines, pushing unsuspecting victims in front of trains. Kieran Kelly was 5'7" and weighed less than 10 stone, dripping wet. He was short, slim and an insignificant character. No one saw as a threat. He spoke to each of his victims and they would walk away from him, and he would repeat this over and over until the victim ran out of platform and they were standing close to the tunnel. Kelly would stand, hands in his pockets, and rotate his shoulder and nudge the victim under a 100-ton train. It is believed he killed more than 30 people between 1953 and 1983. More is known about Kieran Kelly than most serial killers, and could be one of the most prolific serial killers in Britain and one of the few Irish serial killers. Kelly managed to secure 8 mistrials and acquittals for murder or attempted murder before finally being convicted and sentenced to life. Born on the 16th of March 1930 in Rathdowney, Ireland, Kelly and his family moved to Dublin in the early 1940s, where he became involved in petty crime. At 18, he enlisted in the British Army and was dishonourably discharged in 1951 for going AWOL. Kelly went back and forth between Dublin and London before settling in London in 1960. He married twice, once in Ireland and once in London, and had a number of children. His second marriage broke up due to his growing alcoholism, which ultimately led to him being homeless and sleeping rough around the Clapham area. In a time of greater government control over mainstream media, the case of the London Underground serial killer was kept quiet, so as not to cause mass hysteria throughout London at the thought of a faceless killer lurking on the platforms, operating without motive or rationale. All the murders were investigated at the time they occurred between 1953 and 1983, then reinvestigated in 1983 and 2015. Initial investigations in the case were carried out by a cadre of elite officers from the Flying Squad, Serious Crime Squad and officers from South London, the same officers who also were dealing with the Crays and the Richardsons. All of Kieran Kelly's victims were male, but unusual for serial killers, he had 3 different kill methods and 3 different groups of people he targeted. Serial killers typically have 1 victim pool and 1 method of killing. Kelly's suspected victims were gay men, police informants, and men who reminded him of his first victim, Christy Smith. According to psychologist Linda Papadopoulos, who looked at Kieran Kelly for the TV series Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer, Kelly despised homosexuals, tramps, and alcoholics. Kieran Kelly would encourage homosexual advances from his gay victims. He would take them somewhere quiet where they could be alone. Then he would get a broken wine bottle and thrust it into the victim's anus, simulating sex until they bled out. His second victim pool was vagrants and police informants. Kelly would get a group of his homeless friends together and he would give out vodka and orange to the group, except for the intended victim. They would receive surgical spirits or white spirits mixed with orange juice. The others would know what was happening to the victim, but they were too scared to say anything. Finally, his third victim pool were victims who reminded him of his best friend Christy Smith. Unable to understand why he had killed his best friend, he continually recreated that murder over and over by pushing victims in front of the train on the Underground. It was in 1953 an unsuspecting Christy Smith was pushed from the platform at Stockwell Station after he made a comment about Kelly having 2 failed marriages by the age of 30. It is thought Kelly took the comment as an accusation of him being a closeted homosexual. And as Kieran Kelly feared same-sex relationships, He thought they were a terrible sin that led to hellfire and damnation. Christy's murder could be described as a crime of passion, as it was committed during a drunken argument. After Kelly realised his crime had gone undetected, he felt a rush of power, which he craved and set out to recreate over and over. He often passed himself off as a witness to his later victims, saying he had spoke to the poor depressed man about his unfaithful wife or money problems, and when the train arrived at the station, they just jumped underneath it. Kieran Kelly's tales had serious consequences for the victims' families, leaving them unable to claim life insurance once the deaths were ruled as suicide. In 1969, Kelly was caught after carrying out an armed burglary and sent to the Old Bailey, where he was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in Broadmoor Secure Hospital. He was released in 1971. Kelly was described here as a violent drifter. On Christmas Day 1975, Hector Fisher was found in Clapham Common, stabbed repeatedly to the head and neck. Hector Fisher was later identified as one of Kieran Kelly's victims. The next murder Kelly was linked to was the 31st of May 1977, when Edward Toll was sleeping on a gravestone that Kelly liked to sleep on. Kieran Kelly took some rope that he was using as a belt and strangled Edwards to death. 68-year-old Maurice Whaley was the next victim to be found dead on the 2nd of June 1977 in Soho. Maurice's face and genitals had been mutilated and the neck of a broken bottle had been thrust into his rectum. Kieran Kelly and another homeless man were found by the police in the area with bloodstains on their clothes. Kelly and the other man were charged with murder. His co-defendant described the crime in grisly detail for the court. 6 months later, Kelly was acquitted after his barrister branded the prosecutor's key witness an alcoholic and being blind drunk at the time of the murder. The co-defendant turned witness subsequently vanished, never to be seen again. In August of 1982, Mickey Dunn, a fellow alcoholic, was killed using a mixed concoction of surgical spirits, amphetamine, various other drugs and orange juice. Both men often slept in the graveyard in Tooting, and Dunn had previously given evidence against Kelly in a murder trial. The murder only came to light when he confessed to police in 1983. In May of 1983, Kelly pushed an elderly man onto the tracks at Kensington Station, and he only survived due to the train driver's speedy reactions, stopping the train in time. Witnesses identified Kelly as the attacker. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder. At his trial, though, the jury couldn't reach a verdict, so he was once again acquitted. Kieran Kelly's final murder came on the 4th of August 1983, when he was arrested for robbery and being drunk in public. Locked in a police cell overnight with 2 other men, one, his co-accused Paul McManus, and a drunk called William Boyd. Kelly told officers in interview what had occurred in the cell. He had strangled Boyd with his socks and a scarf because he was snoring. As detectives were about to take Kelly back to his cell, he shocked them by describing multiple other murders he had committed since 1953. Once Kelly had finished telling his confessions, the officers left the room, stunned by what they had just heard. One of the officers, who claims to have heard Kelly's confession, is Jeff Platt, who said he was loaded with testosterone and adrenaline, mentally, physically and sexually aroused, and couldn't stop talking about what he'd done. He was asked if he had murdered his cellmate, and he admitted that he had, and unprompted, he then went on to admit 15 other people. There had been no evidence to support the claim. The police officers refused to accept his story, and Kelly had to work hard to convince them that he was telling the truth. Detailed checks of the criminal record details at New Scotland Yard revealed that since 1953, Kelly had been charged and acquitted on 8 murders, but none of these were amongst the 16 he had admitted to. After a full-scale murder inquiry by Met Police, they found there was sufficient evidence to support 16 further charges of murder. The Director of Public Prosecutions, a member of the British Cabinet, and a Queen's Counsel, one of the most qualified and skilled lawyers in the county, did not dispute the facts, but recommended just 5 charges of murder on the grounds of cost and expediency, and all other charges to remain on file. After a trial at the Old Bailey in 1984, Kieran Kelly was found guilty of 2 murders, Hector Fisher in Clapham Common and William Boyd in Clapham Police Station, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. During his trial, a psychologist suggested it would never be safe to release him and suggested he should spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. He was first sent to HMP Wandsworth and then on to Monster Mansion, and he was incarcerated for the whole of his natural life as he died in 2001 in HMP Durham. While serving his sentence, he claimed to have killed dozens of people all over London, and if his confessions are true, this would make him one of the most prolific serial killers ever in Great Britain.